Do you know what despair tastes like? Have you ever woken up the day after an election and thought, that's it, I'm moving to Canada? Or what about reading an article about the extinction of a species, or the rate of global warming, or a civil war in another country and thought, this world is going to hell in a handbasket? It actually reminds me of a bumper sticker that I saw not long ago. And that bumper sticker read, "Where are we going and why are we in this handbasket?" I'm pretty sure that most of us have asked that question at one time or another. Now, it is true that we are not supposed to ask it. In many ways, it is impolite to talk about despair. There is a sort of American optimistic strain that puts the kibosh on talking about our darker feelings, including despair. We are supposed to be hopeful and to think that all of the world's problems will be fixable with some good intentions and a roll of duct tape. One Miss Teen USA contestant was asked how to solve the problem of most Americans not being able to identify the United States on a world map, and her priceless response, which has garnered millions of views, was that, well, some people in our country don't have maps, as if getting more maps would fix serious flaws in our educational system. I suspect that under quick fix solutions and optimistic rhetoric, there is a lot of despair, though. The 14-year-old student, Jordan Nichols, put it into a poem. I will read it here. "Our generation will be known for nothing. Never will anybody say we were the peak of humankind. That is wrong. The truth is our generation was a failure. Thinking that we actually succeeded is a waste, and we know that living only for money and power is the way to go. Being loving, respectful, and kind is a dumb thing to do. Forgetting about that time will not be easy, but we will try. Changing our world for the better is something that we never did. Giving up was how we handled our problems. Working hard is a joke. We knew that people thought that we couldn't come back, and that might be true unless we turn things around." Ouch. That is a harsh verdict, with perhaps the exception of that last line, which strikes a somewhat hopeful note. And I think it is particularly painful coming from the mouth of a young person, a 14-year-old. But in case we think that despair is limited to young people, I will offer a second anecdote. A few years ago, Tom Tolles created a cartoon for the Buffalo News. It depicted a lawyer's office. Several people sat expectantly as the lawyer read a will. The will went as follows. "Dear kids, we, the generation in power since World War II, seem to have used up pretty much everything ourselves. We kind of drained all the resources out there for the manufacturing industries, so there's not much left. The beautiful old buildings that were built to last for centuries, we tore down and replaced with characterless but inexpensive structures, and you can have them. Except that everything we built has a lifespan about the same as ours. So, like the interstate highway system that we built, they're all falling apart now, and you'll have to deal with that. We used up as much of our national resources as we could without providing for renewable ones. So you're probably only good until about a week from Thursday. We did build a generous Social Security and pension system, but that was just for us. In fact, the only really durable thing that we built was toxic dumps. You can have those. So think of your inheritance as a challenge, the challenge of starting from scratch. You can begin as soon as, one last thing, as soon as you pay off the $2 trillion debt that we leave you. Signed, your parents. Again, ouch. These are harsh indictments of our social condition. I find them hard to read because they put squarely in view what had been lurking quietly beneath the surface. But that is sort of the point, I think. Despair is often lurking beneath so much of our political and our social lives. It is not often addressed head-on, and it instead exists only as an undertow that threatens to pull us down. Sometimes it seems that any quick fix Band-Aid will do as long as it protects us from that lurking despair. But when Band-Aid optimism fails, we get caught in the undertow. Now, I think we find lots of ways to stop the feeling of despair. Checking out or finding ways to numb ourselves is a common response. When we start to feel ourselves getting caught in that undertow, we might devise different strategies to turn those feelings off. We may need to stop watching the news. We may need to find entertainments and diversions. We may need to find substances and philosophies that keep despair at bay. It's the response of denial. There is no wolf at the door. I'm wondering what it would mean this morning to have a different relationship with despair. I know this is a strange question, and it may come off as somewhat trite and maybe even a bit ludicrous, what I'm going to suggest, but that's certainly not how I intend my suggestion. I am wondering what it would be like if we befriended our despair. What if we actually chose to sit with it, to feel it, to taste it, rather than pushing it down with optimism? What if there is something to this, something that offers the possibility of transformation? The Sufi poet Rumi has a poem that gets at this notion, and it is the poem that Carol read this morning. I offer his short poem here for the second time. He writes, "Pain is a treasure, for it contains mercies. The kernel is soft when the rind is scraped off. O brother, the place of darkness and cold is the fountain of life and the cup of ecstasy. So also is the endurance of pain and sickness and disease. For from abasement proceeds exaltation. The spring seasons are hidden in the autumns, and the autumns are charged with springs." Rumi presents a different wisdom about the darker aspects of our being human. Pain, sickness, disease, they are not boogeymen to Rumi, or at least they do not have to be, he suggests. Instead of hiding them from our sight, Rumi suggests that we open them, that we scrape off the rind and discover their hidden mercies. Perhaps they will change us. Perhaps they will contain something like the very fountain of life, the source which heals us and sustains us and shows us a way forward. Don't fight them, he says. Welcome them, embrace them. The notion gives me a stomachache just thinking about it. But I think that there is truth here. There's wisdom here. In some schools of psychology, this is called holding the energy. It's the idea that something might be gained from sticking with an experience rather than checking out or denying that it's there. It is the idea that when despair wells up in us, we might say, "Hello, despair," rather than running in the opposite direction. I asked a friend of mine if I could share a piece of his story, and he generously agreed. I'm going to call him Tom for the purpose of this sermon. 3 years ago, Tom went into recovery for a serious problem with alcohol. He followed the advice of his doctor and he joined a 12-step program. He said that his first 6 months were terrible. His body had full cravings for alcohol almost every day. He said that it felt like every fiber of his being was aching for a drink. At first, he tried to run from it. He would do anything to distract himself, to not feel what he was feeling. But eventually, he said that he had a breakthrough. Instead of running from the craving, he began to sit with it. He would say, "Hello, craving," and just feel what it was that he needed to feel in that moment. He said that his relationship to it changed by doing this. Craving no longer held the same power. It didn't disappear, but he also no longer feared it. A new confidence began to emerge in Tom. He could make it through craving without drinking and without losing his mind. I found something that he said this week quite profound as I was thinking about this sermon. He said, "Before, when I was drinking, I would do anything to get away from my terrible feelings. But sobriety has taught me that I don't need to run anymore. I can feel whatever is coming up and just let it be. Maybe it even has something to teach me." The question is there something that we can learn from sitting with despair? Is there some secret lesson here? I think that there might be a few. For example, we often say on Sunday that love is the doctrine of this church and service is its prayer. We cannot love and we cannot offer genuine service without feeling the pain of this world. The terrible beauty of despair is that we care so deeply about each other, about the next generation, about the world, that its pain sometimes weighs heavily on our hearts. That's just how things are. When we run from despair or try to numb ourselves so that we don't feel it, we cheapen this very human experience. That's because we have not treated it in the way that Rumi and my friend Tom have learned to treat it, as a teacher, as a guide that has something to tell us. I think that if we can get to that space of learning about our compassion from our pain, our empathy from our suffering, despair may begin to transform itself. In the strange alchemical fires of meeting our despair, of greeting it, we may discover something fragile and true and beautiful about our humanity. By going through, we may come out with an experience that is deepened and enriched. What might it look like to sit with despair and come out the other side of it? I have a couple of thoughts. One, I'm thinking today of the music that we sing. All of the hymns this morning, as well as the anthem, were written after the author sat deeply with the despair of the world. We are a gentle, angry people. We are sunshine in the streets. We shall overcome. All of these emerge from the experience of facing tragedies such as assassinations, families being broken up by harsh immigration laws, and Jim Crow separatism. All of these songs come out the other side of that despair with hope, with determination. What might it look like to sit with despair and to come out the other side of it? Here is my second thought. Do you remember the Jordan Nichols poem that I read at the beginning of this sermon? He's the 14-year-old who wrote the despairing poem called Our Generation. As it turns out, his poem was intended to be read forwards as well as backwards. I will read the backwards version now, which has a very different message, and I will close with that today. Unless we turn things around, this might be true, that people thought we couldn't come back. But that was a joke. Working hard was how we handled our problems. Giving up is something that we never did. Changing our world for the better will not be easy, but we will try. Forgetting about that time is a dumb thing to do. Being loving, respectful, and kind is the way to go. Living only for money and power is a waste, and we know that we actually succeeded. Thinking that our generation was a failure, that is wrong. The truth is that we are a peak of mankind. Never will anybody say our generation will be known for nothing. It is going through the despair of the first reading of this poem that the second reading finds its poignancy. And sometimes it is by going through despair that something in us is transformed, made human, and offered to this world anew. May we find the courage for that journey and remember that wherever it takes us, we are not alone. We are not alone. Amen. I love you, and blessings on your journey.